I'm aware that this is a deviation from the planned videos of foreign policy as a voting issue and the political paradigms of masculinity. I would ask you to blame both me and Twitter. You can follow me there at @2bprudential, and the link to my Twitter is down below in the description. But I had came across a thread where someone was wishfully thinking that Trump wouldn't be in office had Jon Stewart not left The Daily Show in 2015. And when I see someone fawning over one of the greatest contributors to the death of a healthy and informed democracy, I just had to get my thoughts out. So I digress. To say that the state of modern American political discourse is laughable would be stating the obvious. In this two-part video series, I want to take a look at the concept of homeopathic politics, a term I've coined to explain as to how we've gotten to where we are today, in an age of 45-second attack ads and sound bites that are meant to be for what the voter is to place their political stake in the system. This first part of the series is to look at the dilution of the public's understanding of policy and the establishment's ability to easily control the direction of policy and culture. The days of the electorate attending public forums or being aware of long-form political discussion, and the ideas of those discussions being the basis of one's engagement politically, are days of a bygone era. This diluting of American political discourse has been taking place rapidly for almost 40 years, and I want to look into this phenomenon in depth. Before I begin, though, I do want to make a few disclaimers. One, as I had mentioned in a livestream a few weeks ago with Don the Pleb, my age may very well play into a factor as to how I take a look at this and look at it historically. I'm 24, born at the end of 1995, which may make some of you feel incredibly old, and for that, sorry not sorry. I'm aware that many Americans throughout history, as well as other citizens in other nations, have not always had the luxury of being politically inclined or informed. Yet while there is a vast majority of the population that doesn't necessarily participate in the political system despite being informed, and others that may simply choose not to participate, the dilution, however, of the political understanding of the system reinforces that only a select few can participate, and ensure that the powers that be can stay in charge of the direction of culture and national polity. It is pertinent, however, that in any civilized society, with a degree of cultural and educational depth that is accessible to nearly all of its citizens of their respective country, like the United States, that these individuals should be politically informed. A democratic system, especially a republic, is only as strong as its electorate is informed. But as this video will detail, a concentrated effort has taken place to reduce that level of being informed. So let's get into it. So what do I mean by homeopathic politics? For starters, I feel the need to provide some background as to what homeopathy is. Homeopathy, as the infamous and often ridiculed medicinal idea, is defined as the treatment of disease by minute doses of a natural substance that in a healthy person would produce the symptoms of the disease, or that the ingestion or injection of the smallest possible amount of herbs, minerals, spices, and medicinal plants would stimulate the body to heal itself naturally over time. I've defined politics to be defined as the engagement in the activities and process within the governance of a nation or people, especially in the conflict of ideology, party, and policy within the framework of government and culture. And it's this notion of the smallest possible amount that I think is the best way to describe the modern American electorate and its level of being politically informed of the issues and ideas. After all, as Socrates said, I am the wisest man alive, for I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing. Yet the vast amount of information readily available is at our fingertips. It is relatively improbable, however, to have a well-rounded and informed opinion on every single one of the political issues of our day, so we turn to the talking heads and those subject matter experts to give it to us in plain English. Such a lack of research and relying on those in the popular culture and talking heads to provide us the views that we need for our respective sides in our political battles brings us to the concept of homeopathic politics. I've defined homeopathic politics as a concept and a phenomena as the following: exceptionally minute doses of ideological or policy positions now injected into the public space that would produce the symptoms of a politically engaged, and informed public. So what does homeopathic politics look like? It's where the voting age population of a nation has the smallest understanding of a complex or nuanced political position by the nature of the bannered and advertised positions of their particular political affiliation. Now, there are some caveats to this, primarily in what has been classically defined as traditionally low-information voters or single-issue voters, who are engaged in the political process as a mechanism to bring out bodies to the polls or to engage only in the specific advancement of a particular policy position, traditionally in the United States on the issues of gun rights and abortion. We can see homeopathic politics in action today, just as we have for the last 6 years in regarding policing and race. Homeopathic politics tells us that the population that is politically engaged, at large, are divided along the following mainstream positions and slogans, such as defund the police, or ACAB, all cops are bastards. Standing against that would be the phrases such as the thin blue line, or back the blue, in support of uniformed police. Just in the same way we see Black Lives Matter against the term All Lives Matter, terms that are being fed down by the media and those within politics on high to ensure that the common populace has a well-to-go-to slogan to engage in the political battles that be. But the majority of the voting populace will not extrapolate beyond these fed talking points from what was given to them by those in the media, fellows, and experts of their respective positions. So where does this dilution of our general understanding of political positions, ideology, and policy come from? Simply put, the established power structure, or the cathedral to borrow a Moldbuckian term. It is done with the deliberate intent to dilute the public's understanding of the issues, so as to make it easier for the elites and the elected class of society to maintain control, as well as to conduct its business without interference from the plebs. When the masses of our society are less aware and divided on the political minutiae of day-to-day affairs, it makes it easier to have appearances that those in power are following in the interest of those with such a limited understanding. It makes it easier to have controlled opposition, so as that the ruling powers that be can maintain their interests on the ideological, cultural, and market fronts that they so wish to control and set the course of. This, of course, generates voter apathy. This grand dilution of politics in the United States has been ongoing for some time, nearly the last 40 years, from the time that what remained of right-wing Hollywood died after the Cultural Revolution in the 60s in the United States, to where television became the dominant form of media consumption and information dissemination in the country. And from the early 80s onwards, it began. Political satire was part of the first wave of this great dilution. From shows like Spitting Image, Capital Critters, and Spin City were an effective avenue to present satirical strawmen in the vein of what day-to-day politics actually looked like. Shows such as these would help contribute to the apathy of the average citizen, lambasting the political personalities of their day, the two-party system, and increasing control of the democratic system from an administrative bureaucrat and their special interest groups. Don't forget that this link of satire to voter apathy and reinterpretation of reality is the very basics of cultivation theory, whose primary tenet is that the more time people spend living or watching and consuming television media, the more likely they are to believe that real-world society aligns with the reality of the world of television. This isn't just a theory that's being spouted off to back up my claim. There are numerous communication studies that confirm that cultivation theory has a real-world impact on the perception of groups, cultures, and ideas. One of the most commonly cited being the early 2000s television show Will and Grace, wherein the show had a demonstrable effect at normalizing and decreasing documented signs of homophobia amongst the general television-watching public for those who were exposed and watched the show during its original run. It is empirically demonstrable that television shapes and affects the reality and perceptions thereof. Shows of a political nature shape the political reality, and the nature of political shows, cultivation theory and its contribution to diluting politics has another corollary that not only affects the apathy of the average citizen into not voting, but also has the capacity to radicalize and polarize a smaller population into voting for their particular interests, effectively keeping rational minds away from the system and leading the plebs into a tribalistic, partisan frenzy. On the internet, one might think of this as Poe's Law, but its effect has been around for some time, and it is done very well at painting the most ghastly image of an opposing view and group as possible. Normally, a satire or parody is easily discernible from reality, but as we've discussed with the concept of cultivation theory, can also shape our perceptions of the real world. But Poe's Law exists for a reason. Poe's Law, as it's known, is a rule/axiom of the internet that states that without clear indication from the author's intent, it is impossible to create a parody of extreme views so obviously exaggerated that it cannot be mistaken by some readers as a sincere expression of views that are being parodied. This term is relatively new, only 15 years old, but has long played a role in our society before the term was even coined. As political shows continued to maintain an influence of our understanding of the world, of our government and its workers, it would also do its best to provide parody of political parties and groups within those respective movements. Almost every time, of course, as to maintain its monopoly over how individuals think, it is mainly the right wing of American and Western political groups that are overly parodied and satirized, even if in an attempt to be portrayed in a somewhat serious manner. What do I mean by this? Take the Aaron Sorkin types, those who would write shows along the West Wing, arguably one of the greatest political shows of all time. With that being said, take off the rose-colored glasses for your love of Josh Lyman or Sam Seaborn, and remember Sorkin's portrayal of the Republican candidates and talking points of his time. It would be an exceptionally schlocky, overblown caricature of the family values, socially conservative Republican of the time, depicted often as a mustache-twirling villain, or that the ideas held by Republicans would be set up by the show's supporting cast as strawmen for the main characters to knock it down with their elite, liberal, intellectual superiority. Sorkin would let the mask slip further in his HBO show The Newsroom, calling the American Tea Party movement the American Taliban, demonizing the Koch brothers for funding conservative and libertarian causes, while conveniently ignoring the works of Steyer, Bloomberg, and Soros. But as the show came down to a close, the cathedral's desire to maintain the direction of the political and cultural perspective to the left would be maintained through another means of media communication. And none of those had a greater effect on the culture and voting habits of an entire generation than that of Jon Stewart and The Daily Show. Now I know I'm attacking a well-done piece of satire and comedy, and yes, Republicans and conservatives had made several appearances on the show, sparring in what seemed to be in relative good faith with Stewart despite being in hostile territory. But Jon Stewart's dilution of politics and the understanding of the system was so damning that it ruined an entire generation of voters, the older millennials that now grew up with him. So what was Jon's contribution to the dilution of American politics that has brought us to our current homeopathic state? 1. Convince an entire generation of potential voters that only Fox News and other right-leaning media is biased in the United States, and that other forms of media are objective, fact-reporting journalists, essentially establishing the lie that reality has a liberal bias. 2. Encourage activism of progressive causes and for the youth to lead them, despite having limited life experience and information on the subject other than the comedic one-liners and non-sequiturs that Stewart would outline for them. 3. Pan and dismiss conservative activism as strawmen, liars, or perpetuating the claims of the slippery slope. Jon Stewart famously did this with gay marriage. 4. Progressively satirize and strawman the premise of Christian metaphysics, bringing on the trend of the enlightened atheists, that the pie-in-the-sky belief of a Judeo-Christian God is not an intellectual position to hold in modern political discourse. 5. Moralize politics, increasing tribalism and polarization through the simple political rule that progressive equals good and conservative equals bad. 6. Hire and instill a trend for future hosts in similar types of these shows, leading to the Colbert Report, Full Frontal, Last Week Tonight, and others, so that entertainers can control the narrative with humor, satire, and a bias presented as objective fact ad infinitum. To even now, where late-night hosts, other satire shows, and even the return from some of these shows of the studio grave, like Spitting Image, have the effective control over the mainstream narratives of politics and culture. Even these shows themselves and their existence can contribute to the ongoing trend of homeopathic politics. Mainstream right-leaning people can lambaste that the media structure is biased and rally against it, and mainstream left-leaning people who consume the content will simply go along with the talking points and argue that that's just how life works with its liberal bias. So what are the effects of homeopathic politics? What have we seen in the last few decades because of it? 1. A progressively declining rate of political participation. Low voter turnout throughout communities and states, indicated by skyrocketing rates of independent voter affiliation and voter apathy. 2. Rapid and increased levels of partisanship and the painting of either side as evil, godless, or immoral. The Economist magazine has detailed the growing partisan divide between the average Republican and Democratic representative, and the gap between them for common ground rapidly disappearing. 3. Voting bases that have increased the difficulty of reaching out to one another, with a media that is happily placating their desires for community by having programs and networks that explicitly cater to one another, the traditional MSNBC and Fox News networks catering to mainstream liberals and conservatives. All of which has brought us to where we are today. Even in the age of decentralized networks of information, the establishment powers of culture and politics work to do exactly the same as they have in the past with television. Labeling independent creators as part of an alt-right pipeline, warning parents that their youth are at risk of not towing the party line when on the internet, giving the smallest possible tidbit of potential political and policy positions in order to scare, demoralize, or even galvanize populations into being engaged or disengaged without necessarily knowing the entire part of the issue, or simply marching forward by the talking heads of the powers that be. This is only furthered when the Pew Research Center recently detailed that 62% of Americans now hold political views they don't feel comfortable sharing in public, the absolute demonization of right-leaning individuals in America, to where national network talking heads like Keith Olbermann will demand for truth and reconciliation commissions in a post-Trump America. The watering down of American politics has led to the world of homeopathic politics, to where the common man squabbles with its positions that they barely understand, believing to be informed citizens, while the cathedral maintains its control and pushes the lavish, lovely narrative, the Overton window, and by extension the country, further and further leftward. And that's the dilution, the process that's brought us to the state of homeopathic politics, where the debates are unintelligible messes on policy, with moderators asking leading questions that fit their political bias, and long-form political discussion is all but gone, save for think tanks and conferences only attended by those aspiring to be in the inner and outer parties for their career-minded interests. This concludes part 1 of this video on homeopathic politics. Next week's video will look into some of the strategies and potential solutions to help end the state of homeopathic politics, to perhaps improve the system that we are left to participate in without a viable current alternative. I want to thank you all for watching. I would greatly appreciate if you would take the time to share this content if you so enjoy. Like I had said earlier, you can find me on Twitter at 2bprudential. We're close to 100 subscribers, and I think that's a great mark to make in the next week or so after only putting out a few videos. Let me hear your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you all next week, and thank you again for watching.